Hello and welcome to these interactions. My name is Yash and we are joined by Kai and Kyon, students from Liverpool Hope University, and today we are going to discuss about transgender issues.
Hello.
So would you like to share about some of the prominent transgender issues in UK?
Yeah, so recently there has been a legislation change where the government has ruled that transgender women are actually biologically male, which has come from a lot of sort of protesting and like arguing against trans women being who they want to be. But the interesting thing about that is it's actually backwards. It's they gave us the right to change our sex legally and now they've taken it away again. So that's what's been happening recently. I'd say like throughout the UK, attitudes towards trans people are neutral mostly, and then there's sort of the extreme positive and the extreme negative. But people you interact with day to day usually won't have much of an opinion on it. So it's a very interesting situation currently.
How does your understanding of transgender issues in, say, the UK compared to India stand? What do you think the main differences are, and what culturally, why do you think this might be?
So I think in India, it's not only about one tradition or one culture, because there's so many religions, so many cultures. So I think and each has its own way of looking at the transgender issue. For example, it also depends upon which class, which economic backgrounds in which you come from. So in all the metropolitan cities, it will be very different from, let's say, the village, the rural areas, and one tradition or one cultural thing. So I think that's a difference, because if we see UK, that will be predominantly, let's say, Christian world of looking at it. But in India, it will be, you have to see it from different lenses, and each will be either neutral or sometimes even hostile. I mean, there are certain traditions which are quite hostile, but there are some traditions, some cultures which are quite open to that. For example, let's say in Hindu, again within Hinduism there are different strands of it. I mean, if you see the followers of Shakta, which is the feminine followers, and they are more open to the interpretation of gender and all. But if you talk, let's say, to very hardcore, different Shivites or different other gods, they have their own interpretation of transgender or trans people.
So do you think that the fact that India is so big and there's so much culture, like you said, and that England is much smaller, do you think that stops it from going like one direction, and it more so just sort of depends and there's inconsistencies? Do you think it just stems from the size and the differences from place to place?
If I get it correctly, so yeah, I think that goes with every diversity. I think whenever there are diverse voices, sometimes it does lead to inconsistency. For example, even during the hearing of the Same-Sex Marriage Act last year, there were different religions which petitioned in a different way. For example, there were Muslim groups which were very anti. They said no, that Supreme Court should not allow. On the other hand, I remember there were certain groups, for example, the Buddhists. They were quite okay. I mean, even if they were not hostile, they were fine with it. Even if the government allows same-sex marriage. So I think sometimes many voices, it causes difficulty in having one decision making. But I think we have to listen. That's what the Supreme Court also said. In the judgment, the Supreme Court said that right now India as a whole is not ready for this thing, because of course different cities will have the different needs, but the Supreme Court has to see the entire country together. So I think it could slow down it, but I think that also gives the scholars of gender to actually see where most of the resistance is coming from, or where the least resistance is coming from, so that dialogue can happen. For example, when I was working on this issue, so I wanted to see the response of Buddhists and all the the Muslims, and even within Hinduism, what what actually they have to say, why they are opposing it, and why certain sets are not opposing it. So I think it's also a good way to research. But yeah, it does slow down, and inconsistency does lead to kind of what do you say in terms of law does hamper.
Just to touch on what Kai's mentioned with giving rights and then taking them away, I think that's a wider issue. I don't think that's necessarily, I think that's just a general thing. I think if you're given rights, to take them away like 5 years later, I think is pretty bizarre. And that's just regarding anything. I think that's quite
Yeah, it was really weird because I was in India when I heard about it. So it's like, I can't really process it yet, that when I come back to the UK, like, so I was working towards getting a gender recognition certificate for myself, and now I know that when I go back to the UK, it's actually, there's no point in doing that anymore because of this ruling. Like, it happened so quickly, and I'm not even in the country, so I haven't been able to like properly process it. Because I have had, like, in the street, I've had hostile people towards me because of my status, but it hasn't ever been, like, in my life such a like prominent thing in terms of like making friends, socializing, working, studying. It hasn't exactly been a barrier to any of that, but there are certain things where it is a barrier, and then the way that the UK is going is now quite worrying in that there may be more barriers put in place now because of how attitudes are changing. Because I think, like, there's even just in the younger generation, there's a very like stark like contrast between people who are incredibly positive about LGBT plus people and they're all for it, and in fact people who aren't even LGBT plus will campaign for our rights. But then there's also people my age who think it's the worst thing ever, and they will do everything they can to like not be friends with someone who is trans, who is queer. So it's a really weird situation. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and I completely, I think, resonate with that. But I think, again, going back, one of the basic difference, I think, with UK and India would be that here there's not only one way of looking at it, not one religion. So there are many voices, you know. So I think, for example, the faith that I am born into, within that there are many stories and there are many textual references of, you know, whether the supreme god became a woman, or the supreme god, you know, came together with his wife, you know, to have a trance, which is called as Ardhanarishwar, you know, the half man. So I think these are very inspiring stories to read. But how different people interpret it, you know, the maybe, you know, different leaders or different, even the faith leaders will interpret it, that differs. So I think that I see it as a positive thing, because there is something to contrast with. Because if we don't have something to contrast with, we can't actually relish, you know, the beauty of that. So this is one strand. But for example, if you see the different, even the Christianity in India, for example, in Kerala, because when this petition was, when this case was there, it was kind of they were all united together to oppose it. All the religious leaders, whether Muslims, Christians, Hindus, no, we don't want the bill to be passed.
Yeah.
So I think, and I was shocked, you know, why the Christians from Kerala are speaking that way, or why the Muslims from Bengal are speaking that way, and so yeah, it is difficult, but I think there's still hope. I just want to say, my professor used to say, I mean, there are always two ways, you know, there's always a mirror of truth and there's a mirror of hope.
Yeah.
So the mirror of truth is that, you know, these are clashing voices, but the mirror of hope is there within this clash itself. So yeah, and there are some very neutral, there are some very positive voices. I think one of my professor, who is a Christian professor, she really helped me, you know, organize the parades, and, you know, she said, be it like, so I think that is very inspiring also to see that.
Yeah,
Just to add, like because you said about rights being taken away, I think in India it's been decriminalized. The Article 377 was abolished by the Supreme Court. Yeah. So, what about UK? Like, how do you see this different interplay of maybe politics and legality of the different provisions which are being given about how the constitution ensures? Can you just speak more about that?
Yeah, so I mean, in the UK, like, religious belief is one of our core values that is respected, but then at the same time, the ability to express yourself and be yourself is also very respected. It's another part of our values. So, gay marriage is legal, and before the recent ruling, you could change your gender legally. I think you can still change your gender legally, but not your sex legally anymore. There is with healthcare, we have funded healthcare, so it's free for us, and you can access transition like healthcare through that, but it is very tricky. I remember going to a doctor and he said that I was very rare because I was able to start my transition young, when a lot of people in the UK now, you have to be over 18, and you also, there's a lot of rigorous sort of testing you have to go like under, and it makes sense because they want to make sure you're sure, but also when you look at detransition rates, most of the people who detransition, and that is like 1% of trans people detransition, most of them actually, like, they say it's because of social pressure, it's because of the attitudes of other people, it's not because they thought they were doing the wrong thing for themselves. But you have to, so for me it was quite like traumatic, like I had to go through so many questions, everything about my life was questioned, my sexuality, like my childhood, and it's sort of, if you say the wrong thing, it feels like they're going to point at you and go, you're not trans, even though you know in yourself that you are, you know that this is the way that your life should be. And it's sort of a really weird situation. But we don't, like, everything is legalized now, but at the same time, the sort of society around it definitely has a lot of different views on it. And I mean, I've been shouted at in the streets, I've been harassed and stuff, but I would say that is much less nowadays. But then again, I don't know if that's because I am more confident in myself and more masculine and most people may not notice anymore, or if that's because things are better. There is also in the UK, I'd say trans women get the most hate. They are seen like,
There's a stigma, isn't there?
there's a lot of stigma compared to other trans people, trans women. I think so we have the Trans Day of Remembrance, and we sort of like go through the people who have been killed for being trans, and the majority of them trans women. So for me, I am in a safer position. It's not safe, but it's a safer position than trans women. So we have like trans exclusionary radical feminists who have been instrumental in changing the legislation recently to take away trans women's rights specifically, and they sort of, the interesting thing about it is when you look at it, trans women and cis women, they don't have any argument actually, but society has pitted them together instead of looking at the wider issue, which is women's rights. So there's trans misogyny. Trans women actually have a higher level of misogyny that they go through because they're a trans woman. And that's not to say that either like has it off worse or anything, but instead of pitting these people against each other, it would make much more sense to just go, actually we should look at the fact that women are still not respected in our society. It doesn't matter if you're transgender or cis, women aren't respected. And instead of that, people are being pit against each other. And I think that's found across many societies, that marginalised groups, the dominant group will pit the marginalised groups against each other, because then we can't actually change the dominant group.
It's divide and conquer.
Yeah.
I think also I think it's a bit of a popularity contest with governments and MPs, everyone involved in governments, and I think it's easier to represent a larger proportion of people, because these things aren't really voted for. You vote for someone and then 2 years later they make this decision which isn't being spoken about, and I think things should be voted for. I don't think you should just vote for a leader. I think you should vote for every decision.
Yeah.
Because what is a leader other than a representation of the people? And these things aren't said, and they just make these decisions. I think it's easier to go along with 99%, which I think is probably, for me, the issue. It's so much easier and convenient to go along with that.
But what about the judiciary? Like, how does the law? I understand the parliament changing the law, but what about the judiciary?
Yeah, so it's legal. We don't face any prosecution for being LGBT+, but also at the same time, we don't have the same rights as a straight cis person would have. So it's a really strange thing where it's like day to day we're okay, but then when it comes to if you do want to change your gender legally, if you want to get surgery done, they the NHS, which are the National Health Service, they can just say, we don't think you're trans, and then suddenly you don't have the healthcare, and there isn't really any protection for that. You can challenge it,
Yeah, exactly.
but they have the final say still, and so it's a very weird one. Also for the gender recognition certificate, to have a decision on that, which now the certificate feels a bit redundant because of the recent change, but for a decision to be made on that, you have to give a lot of evidence that you are trans, and then it's decided by a panel of people who have never met you, who don't know anything about you. It'll be psychologists. Also in the UK legally, gender dysphoria is classed as a mental illness, so being transgender is classed as a mental illness still. They just changed the name from transgender to gender dysphoria, but it's the same thing. They're saying there's something wrong with our minds, and that's the reason that we want to change our bodies. But for me, that hasn't even ever crossed my mind that there's something wrong with me. I've been put, I'm this person, and I want to change my exterior to match my interior, and I don't see why that should be seen as a problem. But yeah, I'll have that on my medical record for the rest of my life, that I'm mentally ill when actually I'm just myself. But you have to jump through those hoops to get anywhere as well. Yeah.
So, thank you very much. I think we really discussed a lot of commonalities, and where India and UK are on the same stage on these issues of trans rights, but also many differences, which I hope with more scholarship and all, more people who will be reading and learning, and a long way to go about that. So thank you so much for.
Thank you.
Thank you.